Listen to podcasts of Joe Walsh and Chicago's Morning Answer with Dan Proft and Amy Jacobson on the AM 560 mobile app. Download it today at 560theanswer.com/mobile.
Good morning, Dan, and in for Amy this morning, K-Mac, Kristen McQuarrie, Chicago Tribune editorial board. And Kristen, I'm sure you've had time to see the pictures or look at some of the drone footage that's been posted online of the devastation inflicted by Hurricane Michael on Mexico Beach, specifically the Florida Panhandle generally. Why don't we get an update on just exactly where things stand and how the cleanup effort goes? To help us do that, we're pleased to be joined by Fox News correspondent Jonathan Serrie, who is in Florida. Jonathan, thanks so much for joining us. Appreciate it.
Yeah, good morning to you. I'm on Panama City Beach. We were actually here when the storm made landfall, and now we're here as crews come in and try and clean up the damage. We're still in the dark, and we're also with limited water at our hotel. Just basic things that you take for granted are not there. And then some of the harder hit areas, utility companies are warning that it could be weeks before they have power restored. People are eager to get back. Those who evacuated yesterday, we saw long lines of just standstill traffic for miles, people trying to get back into the Panama City area. But authorities are reluctant to let people back in. They're urging evacuees to stay put. They say that it's too dangerous to come back in. As we drive through the roads, we're seeing down trees and power lines. Is especially dangerous at dark. So for those who are already here, police are enforcing a mandatory dusk to dawn curfew just in hopes of preventing needless accidents.
Just going back to what you said about the power outage and how long it may take for power to be restored, the number I saw was something like 800,000 people without power. Is that a ballpark figure?
Yeah, that's talking about the entire southeast region. What's really interesting is I'm looking at the updated numbers, and the total power outages in Florida is about 351,000 customers. And then I look at the figures for North Carolina. They're actually higher at 430,000. So even though this storm was well downgraded, no longer a hurricane, by the time it moved into the Carolinas, it wreaked havoc there, knocking down trees, causing flooding. In fact, there's been some high water rescues going on, multiple ones taking place up in the mountain portions of the state, and then power outages going on all over Georgia, the Carolinas, and Virginia. And so this storm system has been incredibly damaging. First, as a Category 4 hurricane, in fact, the strongest hurricane that has struck Florida's Panhandle in recorded history, and then as a much more downgraded tropical system going through the rest of the southeast.
Jonathan, can you update us on the death toll? I think last I saw it was somewhere around 7. Has that risen?
Yeah, I haven't heard of any additional deaths beyond that figure, but I know that one of the most recent deaths occurred in North Carolina. It was a tree that fell on a man, and they're attributing that to storm conditions that caused that tree to topple.
What's the story with supplies down there for people who've been displaced because of the hurricane?
Yeah, both state and federal governments are coming in with large amounts of water, food, emergency generators are coming in from both public and private sources, and so a lot of supplies are coming in. In fact, we went to a grocery store that had recently reopened after the storm, and we were pleasantly surprised that there was plenty of water being stocked. There were a lot of perishable items that they were not allowed to sell because when the power goes out, of course, there's the risk of contamination. But other food items, non-perishables and water, were in good supply. So it seems like there's a good supply chain going. They are bringing in fuel to the area, and the main issue now is just getting the power back on to get those gas pumps working, to get the lights on in people's houses, and then clearing the roadways so that people can get back in and inspect their homes and businesses.
Do you have a sense for what percentage of people actually did evacuate? And for those who didn't, do you have a sense for kind of why people stay during storms like this?
Yeah, I don't have an exact percentage figure in terms of how many people stayed, but anecdotally, I'll tell you that we've covered many hurricanes in this part of the Panhandle before, and ordinarily you would see restaurants trying to stay open till the last minute, shut down just before the hurricane makes landfall, and then immediately reopen. We had a hard time finding a place to eat. We found one pizza place on the island that was open the day before the storm arrived, and then it closed that evening. And then FEMA often goes by this unofficial Waffle House index, you can tell how serious a disaster is depending on what level of service the Waffle House is giving or if it's closed altogether. During the storm, all of the Waffle Houses on the island were closed. And then just yesterday, one Waffle House reopened. It was serving a limited menu, what it calls its emergency menu, and it was taking cash only. So that's an idea of the level of emergency that we're facing. It seemed that residents took this storm much more seriously than previous storms. When we first arrived, it was a ghost town. Almost all of the businesses were closed, very little activity on the island. And now because people can't get back in, there's still very little activity, other than the people who stayed. It's still higher than what authorities would have liked, but I believe much lower than what we've seen in previous storms.
What's the handle from public health experts there about public health concerns? I mean, in the wake of these devastating events, you have concerns about contaminated water that can lead to cholera, hepatitis A. Also, specifically to that area, the stories about the red tide maybe making its way inland because of the hurricane.
Wow, you've really done your homework. When we arrived here, we went out, but before the storm arrived, we went out to the beach to just check on water conditions, and we started gagging. And then we realized, oh, that's the red tide. And we've covered the red tide on previous stories, but we were so focused on the hurricane, we forgot that there's this second disaster going on at the same time. And marine biologists say that the storm system may either help or hurt the red tide problem. It may push the red tide back out to sea, or it could cause more fertilizer runoff, more nutrients going into the Gulf and causing the red tide to get even worse. So the jury's out on what's going to happen with the red tide. As far as the water, we're under a boil water advisory right now. They just out of an abundance of caution. They believe that as water treatment plants have gone down with the lack of power, with the flooding, with potential backwash, they want people they're recommending that people use bottled water. But if you don't have bottled water, bring your tap water to a boil. But many parts of this island are having issues with tap water because of the lack of electricity. In our hotel, we have a slight trickle on the first floor and no water above the first floor because of the lack of power.
Was there something that was distinguishable about this hurricane than others in this same area, whether it was wind or amount or duration? What was different about this hurricane?
The rapid intensification. On Sunday, we were alerted that there was a tropical system in the Gulf that had the potential to form into a hurricane. We came down to the Panhandle expecting a tropical storm or maybe a Category 1 hurricane. Very quickly, the forecast changed to a Category 3. And then shortly before landfall, it had strengthened to a Category 4, and we were worried that it might go up to a Cat 5. So the rapid intensification is what made this storm system so unusual. We had come from the North Carolina coast covering Hurricane Florence, and with that storm, it actually had started out as a much stronger storm, came ashore as a Category 1 hurricane, but what made it so devastating was it was so slow moving. It dumped all of this rain first on the coast, then inland, causing rivers to crest and all of this epic flooding. And so that was more of a rain event. This is a much more fast-moving system, moving out of the area very quickly, but because of its intensity, the wind is causing all of this damage. But once again, the heavy rains as it moved into the Carolinas, going over already saturated ground, caused even more flooding to a place already impacted by flooding.
He is Jonathan Serrie. He's a Fox News correspondent who's on the ground in Florida. Jonathan, thanks so much for joining us. Very helpful. Appreciate it.
Be safe.
Anytime. My pleasure.
And he joined us on the Turnkey.pro answer line.
It's news, opinion, insight. This is Chicago's Morning Answer on AM 560. The Answer.